Share via email. Report story. By skinny_base. I'm going to tell her. The words lingered in the air for a long moment. The skeletal figure of Toshinori Yagi, formerly All Might, shifted in his comfortable recliner. Taking a sip of tea, he cast his gaze to the determined face of his successor. The former and current pro heroes hadn't lost touch since Izuku's graduation and debut as the pro hero Deku. Far from it over the years, their bond had shifted from that of a mentor and mentee to a true friendship. They met fairly regularly now, either at a cafe or one of their abodes, to talk and spend time with each other. Is this a request or a statement? Toshinori asked teasingly. Izuku glanced at him with a look of confusion on his face. You came and asked me before you told Todoroki. Do you feel the need to ask about Uraraka? It's your power too, you know, even more now than ever. At this point, you don't need to ask me who can and can't know. I trust you to think your decisions through. Izuku's eyes filled with determination once again. This time it feels different. Todoroki is one of my best friends, and I think he sees me as a friendly rival. Uraraka is. He hesitated slightly and smiled. My girlfriend. My partner. I trust her with my life. I know she's strong, but there's still part of me that wants to protect her. I don't know if sharing the secret or keeping the secret is the more dangerous choice. Then it's a statement. The old man smiled. Do you think it's the safer option? You said it yourself. She's a strong young hero, All Might rebutted. The life of a pro hero is a life of danger, and both of you take it in your stride. I was impressed with what she said about her time as a sidekick when she joined us last month. If anyone can bear the burden of this secret, it's someone like her. Both men shared a warm smile recalling Uraraka's vibrant telling of her exploits. But don't look at me if you want relationship advice on top of that. I've always been hopeless with romance, even now that's partly why I was so focused on being the symbol of peace. Or perhaps my focus was why I didn't do well with romance. Either way, I can only judge this hero to hero. That's another issue. She's not just my girlfriend, we're both working at the same hero agency. Do you think that would change anything? All Might took in a sharp breath. He knew exactly what Izuku was thinking. Midoriya, I had my reservations about telling Night Eye, but I did not regret it until I faced All for One at least. He took it well, about as well as you took finding out about my injury. He sighed. No one truly knows what the future holds, you proved that. Even if I knew what would happen between the two of us, I still would have told him. Deku nodded. All Might could tell the young man was mulling over his words. He welcomed the comfortable stillness that grew between them, underscored by Midoriya's soft murmuring. Shortly after, the young man stopped and took a sip of his tea, sighing in satisfaction. You know, I think you should try finding someone. You deserve love, Yagi. Out of all the people in the world, I think you deserve love the most, and not just on account of being All Might. Izuku smiled at his old mentor. Toshinori was thankful that he wasn't drinking at that moment. He laughed a strained but hearty laugh. Perhaps I should. Midoriya, he rattled through the laughter, perhaps I should. The funeral for the man who was once the greatest hero in the world was surprisingly subdued. Though thousands came out to pay their respects in the wake, the actual funeral ceremony had been a much smaller affair. Of those there, most were pro-heroes, including a good portion of classes A and B from Izuku's cohort. Nezu made a rare public appearance. Even the generally aloof Eraserhead was there in a black suit and tie. Promoted stories. You'll also like Zero Deku Onishots 31.1K 790 because of circumstances, this book won't be continued unfortunately. Feel free to check out my other stuff. Thank you for understanding. Much needed love. Yandere Succubus Momo X Izu. 49.6K 756 after Wattpad had decided to delete this story out of nowhere. I and many reader were distraught. So I'm making a remake of the story from the ground up to compensate. Son of all for 1768K 12.6K. This is a fanfic of extremely op Izuku. I do not own BNHA. Convicted Hearts 3250 like my other story but ILI longer. Return of Mokuden discontinued 3.5K 45. This story is officially up for adoption. If anyone is interested, message me or comment on the story. Finished. 8.2K 508 tilde. He save all of them, just a smile plastered on his face before disappearing through the wind. Her prince from the underworld, half demon is. 0.25.4K 450. It's basically the same story as my Succubus Momo X Deku story. I know. Real original, but hey, now you guys get a Deku from the other side of the tracks. Outside of the temple, Izuku did his best to control his tears. He fondly remembered the May times Toshinori had chided him for how easily he cried. When the time came for those present to pay their final respects, the new number one didn't try to hide his grief. Now, Izuku and Ochako were back in their shared apartment after a long, somber drive. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over them as they entered. They took off their shoes, hung up coats and doffed the less comfortable parts of their formal wear. Izuku immediately walked to the kitchen. To some it may seem inconsequential, but Ochako knew exactly what he was doing. She had seen this before. Any time he faced a major setback, any time he knew he failed to save someone, Deku would find something that would support someone in any way and focus on it. No matter how small, how technical, or obtusely it would help, he put all his energy into it. She knew it was his way of coping. She knew it made him feel like he was doing something good. Good. But she also knew how fragile he was when he got like this. How consumed he could get. He had been like this after it happened, even after the rescue effort. After he lost his mentor, his friend, she sighed to herself as she slowly followed him a moment later. When she got to the doorway, she saw her boyfriend crouched in front of the fridge, his face hidden behind the open door. Some leeks and an onion were already on the countertop. She walked up to him and heard the familiar sound of muttering as she drew closer. Gently, she put her hands on his shoulders, slightly raising her little finger out of habit. He tensed up under her touch. She began rubbing her thumbs on his shoulders in a circular motion. Deku. Izuku turned to face her, tears already falling freely. They crashed into each other, embracing in a tight hug. Izuku wailed into Ochako's arms while she sniffled, her tears mingling with his. They sobbed together, overwhelmed with grief. It was finally starting to sink in. All might was gone. The pair slowly crumpled down to the floor, both still holding on to their partner for dear life. After what felt like several hours, they both calmed down a bit. Izuku still sobbed heavily as Ochako rubbed his back. I know, Izuku, Ochako repeated as reassuringly as she could in spite of her shaky voice. I know. No, you don't, Izuku responded after a few moments. Ochako was shocked by the seriousness and guilt in his voice. She looked at him in disbelief. Not fully, at least. What do you mean? Silently, Izuku stood up, offering his scarred hand to his girlfriend. Stunned for a beat, she reached out and took hold. He pulled her to her feet and led her to one of the dining chairs. She sat down. He pulled another chair around to face her and sat in it. His face was calm. For some reason, that worried her. She had seen the focus this man could have, but being the direct target of it was still overwhelming. She looked pleadingly into his emerald eyes. A cyclone of love, sorrow, fear, and guilt swirled within them. What I'm about to tell you must not be shared. At his words, the tension that had been building reached boiling point. An indescribable weight fell on the room. Ochako almost attempted to float herself. Instead, she just nodded nervously. Izuku was still for what felt like an eternity. Behind his eyes, she could tell his mind was in turmoil. He opened his mouth to speak but stopped short. Uraraka was fixed to her seat, not sure what to make of the situation. Tentatively, she held out her hand towards him. His uninjured hand shot forwards to hold hers faster than her eye could truly register, grasping onto her delicately. Finally, he took in a deep breath. All Might is the reason I'm here now, not just cause he's my inspiration or my mentor. He paused and looked deep into her eyes. When I was born, I was quirkless. Ochako felt as though the entire world had shattered like glass. The number one hero, her best friend, the most amazing person she knew, was quirkless. The idea crashed through her brain like a meteor. Everything she knew was scattered. She could barely force out an utterly shaken, "Wah." Deku squeezed her hand tightly, drawing her eyes back to him. For some reason, he was smiling. In spite of his obvious fears, in spite of the earth-shattering revelations she was hearing, he was smiling. It was soft, timid, just barely breaking through, but Uraraka took comfort from it. She lived for his smile no matter how small. I always wanted to be a hero, he said fondly. I was determined to be the world's first quirkless hero until the day I met All Might. That day, he saw me do something that I wouldn't have believed if I hadn't been doing it. He saved me once already that day. I told him about my dream, and that I was quirkless. He deemed me worthy of being a hero. So, he gave me his quirk. Gave you his. Again Ochako found herself to be speechless as everything she thought she knew was turned upside down. My quirk is one for all, Izuku declared, inhuman confidence reverberated in his voice. It first belonged to the brother of All for One. It's the result of a stockpiling quirk combing with a quirk that allows its user to pass on their quirk to someone else. With each successive holder, the power within it increases. Each wielder is chosen in the hopes of defeating All for One. All Might was the eighth holder. I am the ninth. There was a long silence as Izuku gave time for Ochako to grasp what he had just said. Anger and joy flowed round her mind, underscored by confusion while she wrestled with her thoughts. This power, this burden, he's kept it secret from me, he's kept it from everyone. But he's telling me now, I can hardly believe it, surely no one could believe it, it's mad. All Might and now him. But he's held it all this time. He wasn't born with this power, he earned it. Suddenly everything made sense. The noted similarities, the closeness of their relationship, All Might's last words as a pro, his last words to Izuku, Bakugo's reactions on multiple occasions. The brief anger that flared up inside her dissipated as quickly as it grew. One question immediately rushed to the front of her mind. When? She nearly shouted. The energy of the question almost launched her from her chair. Sorry. Izuku stammered in surprise. When did you get your quirk? She clarified, still barely maintaining a decent volume. The day of the entrance exam, he replied bluntly, I trained for 10 months under All Might's guidance to be capable of wielding it. Ochako had thought she couldn't be any more stunned. You mean, you saved me with a quirk you had for less than a day? Yeah, that was the first time I ever used it, he admitted sheepishly, shrinking in on himself just like he used to all those years ago. Ochako could clearly remember that day. How could she ever forget what she saw? The zero-pointer looming over everything. The rubble falling and trapping her leg. The blur as a green-haired boy launched skywards and caved the robot's face in, and then he fell, 3 shattered limbs flopping behind the screaming boy. That was the first time he ever used his quirk. She reached forwards, leaving her seat, and pulled Izuku into what felt like the 100th hug that day. Today was a strange day. Everything was changing and yet so much stayed the same. She was in awe of her boyfriend and all he had been through. Yet he was still the same old Deku who saved people with a smile. She was stricken with grief at the loss of All Might. But the world was still protected by his acts of heroism. Do you think any different about me now you know I was quirkless? A timid, frightened voice spoke up over her shoulder. A little, Ochako confessed. She felt Izuku tense up in her arms. I'm amazed. It explains some of the things I know about you. But I still see you as the same wonderful hero you are. I still see the wonderful guy the first fell in love with. I still see my Deku. I guess now I just see more of you to appreciate. Ochako felt Izuku's arms hold her even tighter. His body started to shake a bit as her shoulder started dampening again. Where does this boy get all this water? Then a new thought struck her. She loosened the hug to look at him. What was it that made him choose you? She asked. Izuku looked away. I moved before I could think. Huh, he smiled at her dumbfounded reaction. When I first met All Might he saved me from this sludge guy. I asked him if I could be a hero without a quirk and Izuku's expression had grown distant as he trailed off. And Ochako prompted. He laughed as he looked back at her. He shrank. Ochako could barely hold her own laughter, turning away in time to avoid spurting in his face. She could picture a young Deku watching the buff heroic form of All Might disappear. She was about to comment on how her boyfriend surely reacted when she realized that he had grown solemn again. She gave his hand a squeeze. Then he told me I couldn't be a hero. The smile was still on his face, but it was hollow. Ochako felt anger stir deep inside of her again. Being a hero was his dream and yet his idol told him he couldn't do it. She found it hard to believe someone so publicly positive could be so thoughtless. He would always do everything he could to save people, young or old. He said that, after you just survived a villain, he said you couldn't be a hero. Way to kick someone when they're down. Izuku stared at her for a long moment, surprised by the outburst, especially one directed at his late mentor. Before he could say anything, his girlfriend's face twisted in recollection. Wasn't Bakugo attacked by a sludge villain a year or so before we went to UA? He chuckled at the sheer emotional whiplash. That happened on the same day. I had accidentally knocked the villain out of All Might's pockets, and he found Kachan. I went to the incident without even thinking about it. It was just my habit to go and witness heroes in action. Then I saw the villain trying to drown Kachan like he had tried with me, and none of the heroes could rely do anything, so I ran and I tried to save him. Ochako gasped, hooked on his every word. All Might was watching but he'd gone over his time limit. Seeing me, a quirkless fanboy running in inspired him to push further. He saved us both and the rest is history. He told you that you could be a hero, she continued. He trained you, gave you his power, and you saved me. Then I saved you from falling. And we both got into Ua, she sighed wistfully. I hadn't realized I had so much to thank him for. You're right, I didn't know. They found each other's embrace again. Sitting there, Ochako on Izuku's lap, both heroes silently thanked their former teacher. They didn't care whether or not they were crying. All they cared about in that moment was holding on to the person they loved. Thank you for telling me, Izuku. I won't mention any of this to anyone. Well, Kachan, my mom and Todoroki already know. He sounded like a child that had been caught misbehaving. Was that the only way you could think of disproving Todoroki's theories? For the first time that day, they both laughed with proper, hearty laughter, almost falling off the chair. Today was a strange day. It was filled with sadness and mourning, yet hope and joy still broke through the darkness. The light of the symbol of peace still shone. Where stories live. Discover now.